since we have been talking about financial compliance, I'm going to make it a little quicker, and I'm going to extend that based on what Dr. Singhal mentioned about, right? And one of the areas I'm going to focus on is use of technology, right? In terms of certain aspects of financial compliance, how do we ensure use of technology can help mitigate them, right? And we are going to focus on something called as an SAP accounts payable automation. Now, the entire story starts with, if you look at the crystal ball, right, and we are gazing as a financial person, some of the challenges you face is an invoice. What happens once an invoice comes to you, right? And there are, again, a lot of compliances around how the invoice is processed, right from the input tax credit, right from the GST related information, right from the IRN number, your vendors, are they filing the right information or not? If there are MSME vendors, you have to pay them in 45 days. A lot of these challenges are existing, and a lot of these challenges also lead to cash flow impacts, right? And why this is happening? Primarily, is there a solution to this? Currently, there doesn't seem to be a solution offered in an integrated manner. So if you see what's happening really, right, there are three players in the game. There is government, there is you, and then there is your vendor. Government has put the entire onus on you to ensure if you want the input tax credit, if you want to pay them, the MSME vendors, in 45 days, or you want to be compliant, it's the 100% onus is on you, right? And this is where, if you look at this, the vendor is interacting with the government in real time as mandated as part of the e-invoicing strategy. Similarly, you are interacting with the government in real time, but the vendor is interacting with you in a very manual based manner. And that's where the entire problem, the crux of the problem is, right? Because whatever the vendor is sending to you, you're processing it manually. There is a delay into the process. There is inaccuracies because you have no control in terms of what the vendor sends you till you actually process that information. For example, an invoice. Till you try to get that invoice in your system, you have no way of finding it out or doing a pre-check on that, right? And that's been the problem, and it will keep staying that way because none of these players are talking to each other in an integrated manner. So what's the solution to this, right? And the challenge here, government is also stated no IRN, sorry, there is no tax invoice. There is nothing like an invoice which exists, which means even if there is an input tax credit, you cannot pay that, right? You will not get that tax credit itself. No tax paid by you means no tax credit for you. MSME payment is another challenge which comes into picture. The MSME Act brings in that challenge. Plus, GST also states that you have to pay the vendor within 180 days. It's a duplicate interest rate chargeable to you by the vendor. So a lot of these challenges do exist, right? And this is how do you solve this with the help of technology? Now, before we get into technology, let's look at this triangle of imbalance between these three stakeholders, right? How do I ensure I can streamline this process? Now, if you see this triangle, there is no central point of meeting each other to validate things, right? And this is when we want to make it a seamless process. You have the vendor who, of course, initiates all their invoices and transactions. They, of course, communicate with the vendor through the IRP portal and everything. And then, of course, they also send you the invoice, right? But and you also interact with the government. Now, is there a common meeting point, and can that be introduced with help of technology, right? Which government is not given you as of today. So that's what we call the golden glue, right? Now, this is the golden glue for bringing that balance. So before anything comes to you, is it pre-validated, pre-checked, and you are already aware that this is what is going to happen, so you can take informed decisions. And this is where we are going to focus on the golden glue for this balance. And this is an exhaustive view of the golden glue, right? So what we are saying is, to bring that balance, you can bring in something called as a vendor portal, where the vendor is submitting the invoices they are going to send to you. And when they are submitting, if you see on the top, there is a green box. It is getting validated through the government's IRP system. So for larger vendors, they already have their IRN generated. You need to validate that, right? Is this accurate or not? That's where it will do that validation. And if you are working with MSME vendors, government has already said from 1st of August, 5 crores and about turnover, any vendor having that turnover has to mandatorily file the IRN. Maybe by mid of next year, it's going to be 1 CR and above, right? Now, can I make my vendors generate this from this system itself, especially the MSME vendors? So for me, the risk or the input tax credit and the MSME payment issue gets minimized or mitigated. So that's what you can do it from this portal itself. You can pre-validate, pre-check. Now, another important factor, it's not just the GST and compliance. it also has to be PO compliant. Whatever purchase order you have sent to the vendor, it is meeting those requirements. Is it meeting those pricing? Is it meeting those quantities? Many other things here, right? And this is where this portal brings in that vendor compliance with respect to the purchase order. So whenever you receive the invoice in your back in your SAP or ERP system, it is not only a GST compliant, but it's a PO compliant invoice as well. Now that's the first golden glue point. Now not every vendor as part of the journey would come onto this portal because in India we have suppliers with different maturity. Now how do I handle suppliers with lower maturity who cannot come onto vendor portal? This is where we work with the paper invoice today. And then we'll process it through an invoice approval workflow. We'll get into the system by validating the QR code. We'll capture information from the QR code, which is on the paper invoice, and then we'll send it through a GST reconciliation cockpit. If you see the third golden at the bottom, which is called the GST reconciliation cockpit, this is connected to the GSTN system. So whatever goes through this, you do the validation whether the vendor has paid the taxes, they have not paid the taxes, whether the information which has been fed into even the paper-based QR code, is it right or not? So you have a real-time validation through the GST reconciliation cockpit. This also acts and tells you, for example, whether the vendor has filed the GST or 3B or not. So it gives you proper cash flow visibility. Now this is where this three-pronged system, the vendor portal, the paper-based invoice processing, and the GST reconciliation cockpit helps you bring that golden glue to get a one end-to-end view itself, right? And if I was looking at this part, this part on the right hand side, the golden glue is all the technology to solve your problems and get a balanced view itself, right? So I think, so that's it. I had to be a little fast because we are short of time. But thank you very much for being patient, and hope it was an insightful session for all of you. Thanks a lot.